So we're going to continue going through some word problems from our Chapter 7 review. This one specifically at the back page, we're going to go over number 19. So here we have a cardboard box in the shape of a rectangular prism in 3 dimensions. And it tells us the length, the width, and the height. And I think my word inches got cut off here. But these are all in inches. So what we need to do, let's go look at part A. We want to write a polynomial that represents the volume of the box. Now we know that volume of a box is the length times the width times the height. So volume, I'm just going to write as V. Now the length of this box was x plus 6. Now they put it in parentheses, so we know that the entire x plus 6, both of those things, make up our length. Now our width, how wide is this box? They've called this x minus 2. And again, we put it in parentheses, so we better know that the x and the minus 2 make up the 1w. Then our height, how tall is the box? They've called that x minus 1. So this polynomial does represent the volume of the box. This polynomial is in factored form. It never tells us what form to do it in, but we could get it into standard form too. And standard form, while it doesn't require us to do it, it will help us with part B, so I'm going to show standard form for a second. How would I get this into standard form? Well, I just need to multiply and collect all the like terms. Now what's important on this one is when we multiply, we can use the example of something like 2 times 3 times 4. If we did that in our heads, we would take 2 times 3 and get 6, take that entire answer and multiply it by 4, and then we get 24. So we're going to work on the same thing here first. We're going to multiply the first 2, so x squared minus 2x plus 6x, and then minus 12. The x minus 1 is still there. I haven't done anything with it. I am going to simplify this right away to x squared plus 4x minus 12. Now, just like we did with the numbers 2, 3, and 4, after we multiplied the first 2 together, we took that entire answer and multiplied it by the next grouping. So this entire polynomial now needs to be multiplied by x minus 1. So we get x cubed minus x squared plus 4x squared minus 4x minus 12x plus 12. And I just used a vertical organization method. You can organize your work however you want. So I have 1x cubed. I can see that when I combine my x squareds, I have more positives than negatives, and there's 3 more positives. And I have negative 16 x's, and then I have positive 12. So that would be another answer. This is standard form that you could have expressed part A in. Now, if we move on to part B, in part A, they never told us what the volume was. But in part B, they're asking us to pretend, what if the volume was 60 cubic inches? What would the dimensions of the box be? So we have 60 as our volume. I'm going to write it twice, depending on which form we had. Now, what I'm going to argue is if I want to solve a polynomial equation, both of these are polynomial equations, there's 2 things that need to be true. It needs to be equal to 0, and it needs to be in factored form. So in both of these, I'm going to subtract 60 from both sides and rewrite them. So this would be 0, x plus 6 times x minus 2 times x minus 1, and then that minus 60 is off at the end. Whereas over here, if I subtract 60, my answer would be 0 equals x cubed plus 3x squared minus 16x, and then 12 minus 60, there's more negatives, and the difference between 60 and 12 would be 48. What I want us to see here is if we're going to factor this, we need to get it into factored form. So I would have to multiply these together anyway, if I was going to be able to combine like terms. Because I can't factor it unless I get that negative 60 in there. So in this case, if you haven't already got it into standard form, you would need to go do that. Because if we're here, I've collected all the like terms. And now I could work on factoring this to get it into factored form. Because if it was in factored form, then I can use the zero product property. Now here we notice there's 4 terms. So if I want to factor something that has 4 terms, our factoring flowchart would tell us to use factor by grouping. So if I look at that first group, they already have a GCF. I could pull out an x squared. So I'd be left with x plus 3. Now in the next grouping, I know that what's left in parentheses has to be x plus 3. So if I wanted a negative 48 to turn into a positive 3, when I look at their GCF of 16, I have to pull out a negative 16. Just copying that closer. If I divide this by negative 16 and this by negative 16, I get an x plus 3. And at this point, of course, we're checking our work to make sure that this parenthesis is the same as that parenthesis, and it is. So the number x plus 3 is being multiplied over here by x squared and over here by negative 16. So to indicate that it's being multiplied by both of them, I put it in parentheses. Now another thing we have to watch out for is factor completely. This one actually factors more. I can think of it as x squared plus 0x minus 16. So I'd be asking myself, what are the numbers that multiply to negative 16 but add to 0? And those are positive 4 and negative 4. So finally, we've got it in factored form and it's equal to 0. So one of those factors has to be the reason why we got 0. And we don't know which one it is, so we have to consider all of them. So I'm setting them all equal to 0. So our answers for x could have been negative 3, negative 4, or positive 4. But that's not the answer to the question. We're supposed to be telling them how wide, how tall, and how long this box is. So I have to ask myself, what would I plug in to get that? I have 3 different x values. Is it negative 3? Is it negative 4? Or is it 0? Well, let's consider them. If x was negative 3, if I plugged it into x minus 1, I would get negative 3 minus 1, which is a negative 4. A negative height doesn't make any sense, so I'm not going to use that number. The other possibilities were something like negative 4. The same thing would happen. If I plugged it in to the height, I would get a negative height. That doesn't make any sense. So the only number that would make sense would be the positive 4, right, if we looked at our answers here. Because if I plugged in the positive 4, I would get numbers that make sense to measure distance. 4 plus 6 is 10, and that's in inches. X minus 2 would be 4 minus 2, which is 2 inches. X minus 1, so 4 minus 1 is 3. So the dimensions were 10 by 2 by 3, and this is all in inches.